Well, apparently it's going to make me reboot, so. Yay. Okay, finally I got my computer to cooperate. Sorry about that. Well, good evening. Tonight we're going to talk about planning for security. And are going to start off here with another little joke. We don't pay much attention to information security. We're hoping our competitors will steal our ideas and become as unsuccessful as we are. Kind of an interesting approach, probably not the best. Learning objectives for tonight are that when we complete this lesson, you should be able to identify the roles in organizations that are active in planning. You should be able to explain strategic organizational planning for cybersecurity and discuss the importance, benefits, and desired outcomes of cybersecurity governance and how such a program would be implemented. You should be able to explain the principal components of cybersecurity system implementation planning in the organizational planning scheme. So as we look at implementation of security within an enterprise, it's difficult to overstate how essential planning is. When we're in a setting where there are continual constraints on resources, good planning will enable an organization to be able to make the most out of the materials at hand. The Chief Information Security Officer and other cybersecurity managers can generate urgent responses to immediate threats, but they should be using significant resources towards the long-term viability of the cybersecurity program. Some organizations spend too much time, money, and human effort on planning with too little return to justify their investment. So each organization has to balance the benefits of the chosen degree of planning effort against the cost of the effort. I can tell you from personal experience that the federal government spends a whole lot more money on planning than anybody ever ought to. Then again, some of you may have worked for companies where you go, did they ever plan anything? And then you wonder, there's no investment in planning. So what's planning involved? Well, the key thing to remember is that when we're dealing with cybersecurity, it should involve planning of representatives of all three of our communities of interest, which is cybersecurity staff, cybersecurity management and staff, general line management, and end users. Okay, so all three communities, and IT management as well. And it does involve individuals internal and external to the organization. It involves employees because they're the system users. It involves management because they're responsible to ensure that the organization is behaving in a correct and proper, responsible manner. And outside stakeholders because they are impacted by security efforts and may have a role in security within the organization as well. Among a variety of factors that will affect planning within the organization are the physical environment. Where you are has a lot to do with how you plan. The political and legal environment, because you have to work within and around the laws and the politics of whatever it is that you're doing. The competitive environment, because planning certainly will be impacted by the need for example, a business to remain competitive with the competitors in the same space. And the technological environment, because the specific technologies that are employed are of course going to have a major influence and impact on how the organization will properly plan. So let's look at some principles of cybersecurity management as we move towards figuring out how we go about planning. There are some extended characteristics of cybersecurity known as the 6 Ps. And I always like these kind of things just because they're sort of alliterative, So we have planning, policy, programs, protection, people, and project management. So what we're going to hit tonight, of course, is planning. As we move through, we are going to look at all of these things. Okay? We are going to look some at all of these things. And there are certain precursors to planning. In order to implement planning, organizations will normally begin from some previously developed positions that explicitly state the organization's ethical, entrepreneurial, and philosophical perspectives. This all loops back to the basic quote that we took from the writing of Sun Tzu. First one is what? Know yourself. Okay? Know yourself. So this is all part of knowing yourself. Some of the precursor documents that are developed to support organizational planning, even though you may not at first thought consider them to be these kinds of documents, they include the mission statement of the organization, the vision statement, and the value statement. And you go, aren't those the same thing? No, actually, they are different. And one of the things that you will see as you move forward and become involved in planning for organizations is that organizations will have a set of guiding principles, and normally they break down into 2 or more pieces, but typically it's these 3 pieces. Taken together, though, the mission, vision, and value statements provide the philosophical foundation for planning and will guide the creation of the strategic plan. Okay, so the idea is that there is a certain philosophy behind the direction of the organization, and that philosophy is dictated by these particular documents. Now, so planning. Planning from a management perspective is creating a set of action steps towards goals. So you have to establish goals, you have to create the action steps to achieve those goals, and then you have to control them. That's why management is important. Planning provides direction for the organization's future. And again, some people are all about planning, and the plans necessarily don't have particular meaning. If you were a student of geopolitics as I was, my undergraduate major was European studies. And so I spent a lot of time studying some various components of Europe, but one of them was the Soviet Union. And if you are familiar at all with the Soviet Union, you know that the Soviet Union had they had a nationally planned economy, and they had a series of 5-year plans. Okay? Well, they spent a whole lot more time and effort writing the 5-year plans than they ever did actually executing those. And in fact, 5-year plans were rarely successful. I'm teaching class right now. Bye. Sorry, my kid. So, the point is, though, that we look at these set of guiding documents so that we can create plans that actually work. We have to create action steps towards goals and control how we move through those action steps to actually attain our goals. Planning for the sake of planning always looks good on paper, and that's what 5-year plans look like in the Soviet Union. How many of their 5-year plans ever worked the way they planned them? Well, I won't say none, but probably that would be a safe statement, actually. So the role of planning is important because without specific and detailed planning, organizational units will attempt to meet objectives independently. And when you try to do that, that results in the inefficient use of resources. The primary goal of organizational planning is what? The creation of some detailed plans. Things that are actually going to guide how we move forward. So the mission statement explicitly declares the business of the organization and the intended areas of operation. There's pretty good examples that come from the book. It explains what the organization does and for whom. Random Widget Works designs and manufactures quality widgets and associated equipment and supplies for use in modern business environments. Okay, what's a widget? Well, it's one of those things it's whatever. It's it's an interesting term in American industry. When I was a kid, there was a cartoon series on the Jetsons, and there were two competing companies, and the hero of the story worked for a company called Spacely Sprockets, and the other company was somebody's widgets. But I don't think there were Random Widget Works. So when we write a mission statement, it should be concise. That means it can't be very long. It should reflect both internal and external operations. So it should talk about how the organization, the mission of the organization, both internally and externally, and it should be robust enough to remain valid for a period of 4 to 6 years. People have to revisit their mission. There are some companies that are successful precisely because they continue to reinvent themselves on a constant basis. When I first came into the realm of computing, some of the big players in computing were Sperry Rand. Anybody seen any Sperry Rand computers lately? Unisys. Some of us remember Unisys, but has anybody seen any Unisys computers lately? So what peer of Sperry Rand and Unisys is still around? IBM, because IBM reinvents itself constantly. That's why you have to have a mission statement that's robust enough to last 4 to 6 years, but has to be revisited constantly because organizations do have that need. Okay? And I should have looked this up. I can't even tell you, but I'm certain that over my lifetime, and IBM has existed the entire course of my lifetime, they have probably had a fairly significant number of mission statements. And they've been successful because they have managed to be sufficiently agile to reinvent themselves in the space where they're at. Many organizations will encourage each division or major department to generate its own mission statement. So the university has a mission statement, and each college within the university has a mission statement, and each department has a mission statement. Okay, so that's appropriate. That's the way it's supposed to work. The mission statement is the follow-up to something called the vision statement. The vision statement states where the organization wants to go, and the mission statement states how the organization plans to get there. Together, the mission, vision, and value statements give us this philosophical foundation for planning and should guide the creation of the organization's strategic plan. So this is one, we pulled this, this was an example in the book, and it's a great example because here is an organization that has their mission, vision, and value statements all on one page. Very clean, very clearly expressed. The United States National Archives, which if you've dealt with the federal government much over the years, you realize they actually, for the most part, seem to have their act reasonably together. And part of that is explained by the fact that they plan coherently, okay? So there's an example of mission, vision, and values. I'm not going to read these off. We're going to look at some statements from some folks in the IT space a little bit later as we move through here. By establishing a formal set of organizational principles in a value statement, as well as benchmarks for measuring behavior against these published values, the organization makes its conduct standards clear. So an example, here's our Random Widget Works. Random Widget Works values commitment, honesty, integrity, and social responsibility among its employees, and is committed to providing its services in harmony with its corporate, social, legal, and natural environments. A pretty good vision statement. Key things that jump out to me from this vision statement are, so there are some keywords: commitment, honesty, integrity, social responsibility. Those are nice keywords. I like those in a vision statement. I would wonder if I didn't see, something akin to those. The value statement should be one of the first positions that management should articulate because the value statement represents the prime philosophical underpinnings behind the enterprise. What are we about? What values do we embrace? The trust and confidence of stakeholders and the public are important. And a value statement can be one of those things that is intended to build that trust and confidence. By establishing a formal set of qualities, principles and qualities through a value statement, an organization will make its conduct and performance standards clear to employees and the public. So the vision statement is a little bit different than the mission statement. As we said, the mission statement says, what are we doing? The vision statement says, what do we want to be? What do we aspire to? Okay. The vision statement should be ambitious because, after all, they are meant to express the aspirations of the organization as well as serve as a means of visualizing the future. They're not meant to express the probably, only the possible. Okay? Will every organization ever achieve their vision? No. But there's nothing wrong with having a vision that you constantly strive to achieve. Okay? That's the difference between a mission and a vision. Mission is something, hey, we're going to do this. Vision is, this is where we want to be. This is how we see ourselves. So here's the vision for Random Widget Works. Random Widget Works will be the preferred manufacturer of choice for every business's widget equipment needs, with a Random Widget Works widget in every machine they use. Are they ever going to attain that? Maybe, maybe not. But it's a good vision. Okay? It's a good vision. There is no conceivable way when these two grad students at Stanford started a project in the guy's garage they decided to name after changing 2 letters of a number value. They named it Google. Did they create a vision that said, at some point we're going to be the dominant player in information? No. So the point is that vision statements need to be ambitious because they're where you would like to be, and that they should drive where the organization is constantly heading. Okay. Here are some technology-based company mission and vision statements. And I don't differentiate between mission and vision statements here because some companies don't differentiate themselves. Okay, that's significant to note. Amazon, to be Earth's most customer-centric company, to build a place where people can come to find and discover anything they might want to buy online. Originally, they just sold books. Okay. But they've certainly changed since then. Apple is committed to bringing the best personal computing experience to students, educators, creative professionals, and consumers around the world through its innovative hardware, software, and internet offerings. Gee, what is missing from that statement? The only business folks that they're interested in appealing to are creative professionals. They're not, otherwise, students, educators, consumers. The only people in the business world they're looking at is creative professionals. Sort of interesting. So they've defined a scope within which they're going to work. And that's intriguing to me. Dell, to be the most successful computer company in the world, delivering the best customer experience in markets we serve. Facebook, to give people the power to share and make the world more open and connected. Anybody aware of where Facebook has tried to make their own end run around this statement? Does anybody know what they tried to do in India? Provide internet to everybody filtered through Facebook. Right, they were going to provide free internet for folks, but you had to go through Facebook to get to the internet. And that doesn't make the world more open or connected. And it's funny because, of course, there was a lot of pushback when they tried to do that, and people immediately threw this back at them. This is not what you're about. This is what you say you're about. Why are you trying to do this? Interesting. Google, organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. That I don't know that was originally their statement, but it certainly is applicable now. Microsoft, enable people and businesses throughout the world to realize their full potential. That's it. That's pretty much a vision, I think. Skype, to be the fabric of real-time communication on the web. I haven't looked to see if Microsoft has changed this since they bought Skype. Twitter, to instantly connect people everywhere to what's most important to them. Yahoo, to be the most essential global internet service for consumers and businesses. Ooh, fail. It was ambitious, but yeah. Yeah, that's right. YouTube, to provide fast and easy video access and the ability to share videos frequently. Again, I don't know if that one's changed under Google. Probably not too significantly. Okay, so let's look at components of planning. First thing is strategy. What shapes our strategy? Well, first of all, the statements that we've just talked about. We have to take those into account when we decide that we're going to create some strategy. Strategy is the process of defining and specifying the long-term direction to be taken by an organization and the allocation and acquisition of resources that are needed to pursue this effort. That's what strategy is about, long-term direction. Okay? So strategic planning in general guides organizational efforts and focuses resources towards specific, clearly defined goals. Clearly directed strategy within an organization flows from top to bottom. Okay, so there has to be strategic direction, and it does need to come from senior management, or in publicly traded corporations from governance and senior management. A systematic approach is required to translate strategy into a program that can inform and lead all members of the organization. So as we said, strategy is the basis for long-term direction, and strategic planning is what will guide organizational efforts. Strategic planning is important because it focuses on clearly defined goals. They are long-term goals, but they are clearly defined goals. They are goals as opposed to visions, should be attainable. Okay? You may not always attain every goal, but they should be attainable, and you should work towards that. Strategic planning is a disciplined effort to produce fundamental decisions and actions that shape and guide what an organization is, what it does, and why it does it, with a focus on the future. So, the organization as a whole engages in strategic planning, and those that are responsible for cybersecurity within the organization need to engage in strategic planning for cybersecurity. So if we trace down the stack here, we see that we see the management hierarchy within the organization, and we see that corporate strategy shapes our IT strategy, which shapes our information security strategy, which then governs tactical planning, which governs operational planning. So strategic planning is all about taking general strategy and translating it into specific strategy. Second, overall strategic planning will then be translated into lower-level tactical and operational planning. These are shorter time frame plans that are implemented in a considerably greater level of detail than strategic plans. Each level of division will translate these objectives into more specific objectives for the levels below. So a conversion of goals from the strategic plan to the next lower level will consistently rely on the executive's ability to know and understand the strategic goals of the entire organization, because it's important that everything that's done works within the framework of the organizational strategic goals. Okay, can't conflict with them, and goals should be predicated to the optimum extent possible, try to move forward the overall strategic goals of the organization. The executive should know and appreciate the strategic and tactical abilities of each unit within the organization, and be prepared to negotiate with peers, superiors, and subordinates. So when we get into actual cybersecurity planning, we find that cybersecurity, like information technology, must support more than its immediate parent within the organizational chart. Just as we see that all organizational units will be using information, and not just IT-based information, the cybersecurity group has to understand and support the strategic plans, that is, the strategies of all of the business units. Okay, not just their own, they have to understand strategic planning for all the business units, because what they're doing needs to support those plans as well, because it's a function that spreads across the organization and involves all the members of the organization. The problem that we run into is this role at times may conflict with that of the IT department, because information technology's role is the efficient and effective delivery of information and information resources, while cybersecurity's role, of course, is the protection of all information assets. One of the goals of information technology typically is continuous improvement, and that should be a goal for any organization. The problem with continuous improvement for IT is one of the goals of cybersecurity is to keep things the same. Okay? I mean, there should be a recognition, of course, that you can't, because information technology is continuously trying to improve. But the goal of implementing security is that things don't change, because changes that are unplanned are possibly what? A breach, or anything, any number of things that become an issue for cybersecurity. So as we plan for the organization, we see the CEO is responsible for the general strategy. The CIO is responsible for divisional planning in IT. Other level officers are responsible for planning in their divisions, and the Chief Information Security Officer is responsible for information security planning. So we've said that strategic goals get translated into tasks. One of the ways that many organizations will do this, it's not the only way, but it's a really good method, and you'll find it pretty commonly in use, is to have tasks that are what we call SMART tasks. They're specific, measurable, achievable, reasonably high, and time-bound objectives. Okay? So they will have these SMART objectives. And that's a very good definition of what constitutes a good objective. Specific, measurable, achievable, reasonably high, time-bound. Strategic planning then begins its transformation from general sweeping statements towards more specific and applied objectives. Strategic plans are used to create tactical plans, which are then in turn used to create operational plans. So we have an overall strategic plan. We have a strategic plan for each division. Then we have tactical plans and operational plans. But they don't exist all by themselves. They have to be coordinated with other portions of the organization. And it's important to recognize that information technology and cybersecurity have to coordinate across the entire organization because they are the facilitating function. Okay. Tactical planning is the next level down. Tactical planning has a shorter focus than strategic planning. Usually it's 1 to 3 years, and it breaks each applicable strategic goal into a series of incremental objectives. Budgeting, resource allocation, and personnel are all critical components of tactical planning. Tactical plans are often created for specific projects. Some organizations call this process project planning or intermediate planning. So it's important to recognize that even though we're using some generally accepted terminology, other organizations may call it other things. Project planning, intermediate planning. And then finally we have operational planning. Operational planning is what is used by managers and employees to organize ongoing day-to-day performance of tasks. The operational plan is derived from tactical plans, and operational planning within cybersecurity may encompass a variety of objectives, such as select, configure, and deploy a firewall, or design and implement a security education, training, and awareness program. So these are specific operational plans. They deal with components of our broader planning perspective. So we have, tactical plans, which say we're going to, do certain things in the implementation of security, and then operational plans, which are the very specific items that we're going to carry out. Operational planning includes some clearly identified coordination activities across department boundaries, including things such as communications requirements, how are we going to communicate, weekly meetings, summaries, and progress reports. So when we talk about planning and the Chief Information Security Officer, this being the primary person responsible for certainly strategic planning and guiding then tactical and operational planning in the implementation of security within the organization, first priority of the Chief Information Security Officer and the cybersecurity management team should be to structure a strategic plan. While each organization may have its own format for the design and distribution of a strategic plan, the fundamental elements of planning are the same for all kinds of enterprises. So these are typical elements that we're going to find in a strategic plan. not necessarily all of these are going to be included, but just we're saying typical. So we have an introduction by a senior executive. It will include an executive summary, the mission, vision, and values statements, the organizational profile and history, strategic issues and core values, corporate goals and objectives, and then major business units or products or services, however it's structured, goals and objectives. And then there may be a variety of appendices. One of the common ones is what we call a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, which are very commonly applied to any type of business planning. There may be market analyses, internal and external surveys, budgets, research and development projections, and so forth. Here's some tips for planning. It's important as we're planning to articulate a comprehensive and meaningful vision statement that shares the organization's intent, because one of the things about a quality vision statement is it can attract others to achieve the goals. There should be a sense of logical analysis of objectives and an examination of what's already been accomplished, because you may have some things that are goals that you've already met. Should that mean, oh, we've already done this, we don't need to include it? No, absolutely not. Goals that you've achieved are still goals. So we want to use tools to track outcomes against intentions, to measure effects against prior actions. So we want to look at how prior actions are affecting our outcomes. We want to work from an overarching plan that's developed with input from the key stakeholders. So whatever our plan is for, we need to ensure that all the key stakeholders are actively involved and included in that planning. You should seek transparency in planning to ensure that planning changes are clearly understood by the stakeholders. And we need to make planning a process that engages everyone who's involved to bring them together to work towards a set of common objectives. The more people within the organization are involved in planning, the more likely we are to actually achieve objectives, right? Because people see themselves as a part of this effort. You want to stick with the process over time, because results may not always be achieved as quickly as intended. That doesn't mean there's any reason to either change course or abandon efforts. The organization needs to develop consistent and repeatable methods of planning that are adopted and become a part of the organization's culture. Okay, so organizational culture needs to include planning methodologies. And it's important to explain what is being done so that stakeholders clearly understand the intentions of the planning process, so that everyone who has any piece or part of it knows exactly how the organization is proceeding with this. It's important to ensure that, to the greatest extent possible, we always use processes that fit the organization's culture. Every organization has its own culture, and there are different kinds of organizations that have significantly different cultures. Colleges and universities have a particular culture, okay? And the thing that's interesting is they each have an organizational culture that might vary from institution to some extent, but there are many things that are common. One of the things that's common is, if we look at a college or university as an example, is something called the principles of collegiality. Principles of collegiality say that everyone who is involved in the organization clearly has a stake, and that you respect your colleagues, and that all decisions that are enormous decisions, or even in some cases really ridiculously little niggly decisions, involve the normal governance that we would find within a university. University governance involves every faculty member. So governance for a publicly traded corporation is clearly the board of directors and the C-level management. Governance for a university is, in some senses, a bottom-up governance process because the ultimate governance is the faculty. And it's very different kind of organizational culture than you find in the corporate world. So you have to find processes that fit the organization's culture. One of my colleagues and I were taking a course in educational technology. We had a person in the class who was from the business world. And they kept pointing out things that the university could do that would make more money. And we kept trying to point out to them that the goal of the university is not to make money. And we had a discussion with him after class one day, and he honestly could not grasp that people were motivated by something other than making money. He really couldn't. I mean, he couldn't understand that people worked in academia, and this is pretty common, and you probably are aware of this. There's a lot of us doing our jobs here that could be making a hell of a lot more money if we were doing what we teach in the real world. And a lot of us have done that in the past. And that's one of the reasons that we're here. One of the good things about ITM is we do require faculty to have industry experience, or we won't hire them. But we could be making more money. So why do we do what we do? Well, because we have a different set of motivation. We have different things that drive what we do. And we aren't motivated clearly by profit, So that's why why am I harping on this? Because this is a really important statement. You have to use processes that fit the organization's culture. And every organization has a different culture. I worked for the federal government. Now, I worked for the military. Pretty structured, very hierarchical, very little democracy. Every decision pretty much comes from the top and works its way down, and each person puts their own stamp on it as it works further down the hierarchy. It's probably one of the most structured organizational cultures you would find. So you have to have a process that fits that particular model. Other government agencies, I know, are considerably different with their organizational culture and how people interact and respond. So make the process as engaging as possible so that participants are not overwhelmed. Trust me, planning can be huge, and it is easy to overwhelm people. And the point is to keep people engaged so they don't become overwhelmed. Because it's really easy to go, oh, we're never going to do this. There's too much stuff. Okay? There's just too much stuff. And when we get into risk management, we're going to see some of that. Because some of the things that we talk about doing in risk management, some of the very first things we talk about that you have to do, people throw up their hands and go, we can never do that. Okay? What's the first thing you have to do in the risk management process? Anybody know? I know you're learning in this class to learn this, but the first thing you do is an asset inventory. Anybody ever do an IT asset inventory within an organization? A lot of people, when the first thing they do when they hear that is they go, well, crap, we're never going to get that done. We have so much stuff, we're never going to find it all, But the point is to make your planning process engaging so that people don't become overwhelmed like that. And there are ways to even approach the asset inventory in ways that make it workable, that make it functional. So that's why it needs to be engaging. Deploy a draft high-level plan early. So it's important to have some kind of draft plan to put out to people and then ask for input from stakeholders and say, hey, this is just a draft. We want your input into the plan to help us shape the plan into its final form. Some quick bullet points here. Make the evolving plan visible. Ensure that people can see it. Make the process invigorating for everyone, because that's how you keep people involved. Be persistent. Don't give up. You got to keep at it. Make the process continuous. Gaps in planning processes, that loses people. Okay? We want to make sure people continue to be involved. Provide meaning. So we want to make sure folks clearly understand that, hey, we're not doing this just for the sake of doing something. There really is meaning to what we are doing. Be yourself. Don't put on a different face to run a planning process if you're the one who has responsibility for it. And finally, lighten up and have some fun. Okay? There has to be an element of this, or it just becomes drudgery. And is everything always going to have some element of fun? Well, maybe not, but it's good to try to inject some. Okay. I may or may not be successful with the cartoons I toss into my lectures, but hey, that's what I'm trying to do a little bit. Okay. Let's talk about cybersecurity governance. What is governance? Well, I talked a little bit about university governance, and ultimately at a university, the faculty has governance responsibilities. But in most organizations, governance is the set of responsibilities and practices that are exercised by the board and executive management with the goal of providing strategic direction, ensuring that objectives are achieved, ascertaining that risks are managed appropriately, and verifying that the enterprise's resources are used responsibly. So this is a definition of governance vis-a-vis cybersecurity. Strategic planning and corporate responsibility are best accomplished using an approach that many people call governance, risk management, and compliance, GRC. We actually have a course that's called Governance, Risk Management, and Compliance. Gee, I wonder why that is. Governance, risk management, and compliance seeks to integrate these three responsibilities into a holistic approach to allow us to have sound executive-level strategic cybersecurity planning and management within an organization. To be effective and to ensure we have a sustainable approach in place, cybersecurity objectives have to be addressed at the highest levels of an organization's management team. So cybersecurity governance includes providing strategic direction. Who ultimately provides strategic direction in an organization? Well, in this instance, we're more specifically talking about organizations that have governance processes in place. And so in this case, we're talking about publicly traded corporations where you have a board of directors, or a nonprofit organization where you have a board of directors, or in the case of even of the university in this case, we're talking about the board of regents or whatever the university might call them. The organization that is responsible for oversight of senior management and provides strategic direction. Cybersecurity governance includes establishing objectives, measuring progress towards those objectives, and verifying that risk management practices are appropriate, and validating that the organization's assets are being used properly. So let's talk about the typical actions expected in cybersecurity governance of a board of directors. So now we're pretty specifically addressing publicly traded corporations and organizations structured like that. The actions, this is from the, according to the Information Technology Governance Institute, cybersecurity governance includes all the accountabilities and methods that are undertaken by the board of directors and the executive management of the organization to provide the following. They recommend that boards of directors supervise strategic cybersecurity objectives by, first, inculcating a culture that recognizes the importance of cybersecurity. Basically, the concept here is that it has to come from the very top down. Okay, and when you look at a publicly traded corporation, you have a CEO who runs the company, but in some senses, the very top is the chairman of the board of directors. okay, the chairman of the board. And so it has to come from that level down. The board needs to align management's investment in cybersecurity with organizational strategies and the risk environment. So they really need to verify that management's investment in cybersecurity has that proper alignment. Need to mandate and assure that a comprehensive cybersecurity program is developed and implemented within the organization. And finally, the board needs to require reports from the various layers of management on the cybersecurity program's effectiveness and adequacy. So there has to be some return back to those responsible for governance so they can validate and verify that, yes, this is in fact working. So what are the expected outcomes of cybersecurity governance? First of all, we expect to see a strategic alignment of cybersecurity with business strategy to support organizational objectives. We should also see risk management by executing appropriate measures to manage and mitigate threats to reduce potential impacts on information resources. We should see resource management utilizing cybersecurity knowledge and infrastructure efficiently and effectively. We should see performance measurement by measuring, monitoring, and reporting cybersecurity governance metrics to ensure that organizational objectives are being achieved. And we should see value delivery by optimization of cybersecurity investments in support of the organizational objectives. Okay. It is difficult at times, and this is an ongoing issue, is to show value delivery from cybersecurity. People have a difficult time conceiving that it is adding value to the organization because the only time we see the value that it adds is when we see a failure. Okay? That's the only time we actually get to see the value that cybersecurity adds is when we see a failure of cybersecurity, because then we see the cost associated with that failure, and then we recognize, oh, maybe we should spend some money on this. Okay? That's why governance is important, because if you have involvement in the organization's governance in cybersecurity, then it's going to permeate. The idea here is that it will permeate the entire organizational culture because it's clearly coming from the board. So this comes from a document called Cyber Risk Oversight from the National Association of Corporate Directors. Very recent, published just this year, 2017. What does the National Association of Corporate Directors say that a director needs to be responsible for? Well, they need to engage in these principles of cybersecurity governance. Directors need to understand and approach cybersecurity as an enterprise risk management issue, not just an IT issue, an enterprise risk management issue. Directors should understand the legal implications of cyber risks as they relate to their company's specific circumstances. And that will vary again from company to company. Boards should have adequate access to cybersecurity expertise, and discussions about cyber risk management should be given regular and adequate time on board meeting agendas. And directors should set the expectation that management will establish an enterprise-wide cyber risk management framework with adequate staffing and budget. Finally, board management discussions about cyber risk should include identification of which risks to avoid, which risks to accept, and which to mitigate or transfer through insurance, as well as specific plans that are associated with each approach. So what benefits should we see from cybersecurity governance within the organization? Well, benefits, if it's properly implemented, we should see these benefits. An increase in share value for the organization. An increased predictability and reduced uncertainty of business operations. Lack of cybersecurity creates uncertainty. Okay? Lack of it creates uncertainty. Having proper cybersecurity in place creates a much greater level of certainty, okay, and predictability. Protection from increasing potential for civil or legal liability. One of the interesting things about being a member of a corporate board is that generally you're shielded from liability for your actions you take as a board member, unless corporate board members egregiously fail to engage in due care and due diligence. We talked about those terms, standards of due care and due diligence. When corporate directors fail to ensure that due care and due diligence are exercised, they can become personally liable. In fact, back in the day, I gave serious thought to buying some stock in Enron as things were starting to collapse. Why did I think about buying stock? Because I was thinking, maybe some of us can sue some of the directors and get some money out of this. Okay? Because corporate directors typically are not poor people. And they do bear personal responsibility when it can be demonstrated in a court of law that they have failed to exercise expected standards of due care and follow through with due diligence. And certainly the board of directors of Enron, I don't know if any of them went to jail. Probably should have. Okay? A lot of other people at Enron went to jail, but folks involved in corporate governance, if they didn't see what was going on there, they clearly weren't doing their jobs. So that's important to recognize. So cybersecurity will help protect against civil or legal liability. Cybersecurity governance will help optimize the allocation of limited security resources. Because, yes, we'd love to spend everything we could on cybersecurity and have things be perfect, but that's not possible. Okay? We don't live in a perfect world. Nobody has unlimited resources. So what we have to do then is ensure that through governance we are making good choices as to how we will optimize the resources that we're going to make use of. And it should assure that we have effective cybersecurity policy and policy compliance. What are the benefits of having cybersecurity governance? Well, it creates a firm foundation for efficient and effective cyber risk management, process improvement, and rapid incident response. It should create a level of assurance that critical decisions are not going to be based on faulty information. And it should provide accountability for safeguarding information during critical business activities, such as mergers and acquisitions, business process recovery, regulatory response. Any of these create enormous risk, enormous additional risk. So if you're Continental Airlines merging with United Airlines and you have very disparate information systems, which, by the way, they did, they essentially had very little commonality at all, and the whole process of merging those systems creates enormous potential for cyber security risk. Okay? So that's why these critical business activities create much, much greater risk environments. So according to the Corporate Governance Task Force, which is an advisory group from the National Cybersecurity Partnership, the organization should engage in a set of core activities suited to its needs to guide the development and implementation of the cybersecurity governance program. Conduct an annual cybersecurity evaluation, the results of which the CEO should review with staff and report to the board of directors. Conduct periodic risk assessments of information assets as part of a structured risk management program. Implement policies and procedures that are based on risk assessments to secure the information assets of the organization. And establish a security management structure to assign explicit individual roles, responsibilities, authority, and accountability. Should also develop plans and initiate actions to provide adequate information security for networks, facilities, systems, and information. Treat cybersecurity as an integral part of the system lifecycle. So when you're creating new information systems, from the very beginning of the planning process for the information system, ensure that cybersecurity is integrated. Provide cybersecurity awareness, training, and education to personnel within the organization. Periodically test and evaluate the effectiveness of the cybersecurity policies and procedures. Typically, this is done through what we call a security audit. And create and execute a plan for remedial actions to address any cybersecurity deficiencies that are determined either through assessment or through audits. Okay. This treating cybersecurity as an integral part of the system lifecycle has really gotten my attention over the last week or so because I've been writing some degree proposals, and we're going to propose a Bachelor of Science in Cybersecurity and Information Technology. And one of the things that's emerged as I've been writing this degree proposal is that we have courses in our curriculum that need to include more security in the basic courses that aren't security courses, okay? For example, we have a course that addresses user interface, okay? Well, user interface actually has important cybersecurity implications, because poor user interface creates risk. And we can enhance our cybersecurity in many cases by optimizing our user interface design. So we need to very specifically address that aspect of interface design when we deal with that class. So now I'm going through and I'm looking at classes that are not cybersecurity courses that need to have a stronger security element in the course, just for the sake of everyone, for the sake of all students, regardless of their curriculum. So that made me, that's what came to my mind when I thought treat cybersecurity as an integral part of the system lifecycle. Hey, I have to treat cybersecurity as an integral part of our curriculum. Period. For every part of the curriculum, and it has to be considered. I do know that Billy Papadimitriou, who's teaching ITM 301, clearly addresses some cybersecurity elements in that course. And that's important that he does that, right? Because that's essentially right now our basic introduction. For students that are coming through and will be undergrads in here, either probably were transfer students or did ITM 100 already. We've restructured ITM 100, so if you're a transfer student and you started this term, you're going to take that course, okay? And that's going to have a whole unit on cybersecurity, and the text for that is going to be SP 800-12 because it's a good, short introductory text in cybersecurity. Other benefits is it allows the organization to develop. Let's see. So we were talking about the benefits and other benefits continuing allows the organization to develop and implement incident response procedures and establish plans, procedures, and tests to provide for continuity of operations. Now, we're going to discuss a little bit of that in this course. We have a whole course in it in the spring. And encourages organizations to use security best practices guidance, such as the ISO 27000 series or the NIST frameworks, in order to measure cybersecurity performance. We have to have some standard that we're going to measure against to determine whether we're achieving our expected levels of performance within the organization. Okay, so when we look at implementing cybersecurity governance, there are a few ways of implementing governance. And this is a corporate governance task force general governance framework called the IDEAL model. And the IDEAL model, even though it was developed in conjunction with the corporate governance task force, actually was developed by Carnegie Mellon. So they actually own the phrase, the IDEAL model. The ideal here is initiating. By initiating, we lay the groundwork for a successful improvement effort. Diagnosing, determine where you are relative to where you want to be. Establishing, plan the specifics of how you're going to reach your destination. Acting, do work according to the plan. And learning, learn from the experience and improve your ability to adopt new improvements in the future. So they have a more detailed ideal model here that is, obviously more step-by-step. Set context, build sponsorship, charter infrastructure, diagnose characteristics, current and desired states, develop recommendations, and so forth through the model. More importantly are cybersecurity governance responsibilities and where those particular responsibilities fall. These are responsibilities that are delegated from the governance, the board of directors, as it were, whoever is the ultimate top level for governance. One is to oversee overall corporate security posture and be accountable to the board. That's a CEO responsibility. And brief the board, customers, and public may also be the CEO, okay? Because the CEO is the face of the organization. And that's important to remember and recognize. Then we need to set security policy, procedures, program, and training for the company, respond to breaches, and be responsible for independent annual audit coordination. So that's either the chief security officer or the chief information officer or the chief risk officer or a department or agency head. There's a variety of people who bear those responsibilities. It may be one or any or all of those people. Some of these responsibilities overlap. So implement, audit, enforce, and assess compliance sits at that mid-level manager level, that upper-level management level with the CSO, the CIO, the CRO, and so forth. But it also is a part of mid-level management's responsibility. And finally, at mid-level management, we see communicate policies and program and ensure training is conducted, mid-level management. And finally, implement policy and report security breaches and vulnerability. That's enterprise staff and employees. That's everybody down the way. So in 2007, the CERT division of Carnegie Mellon University Software Engineering Institute published and promoted an implementation guide for its trademark Governing for Enterprise Security program, which is a little bit outdated, but it's still useful to look at as another model as we're looking at security governance. It includes 3 supporting articles. Article 1, Characteristics of Effective Security Governance. Article 2, Defining an Effective Enterprise Security Program. And Article 3, Enterprise Security Governance Activities. So it creates a hierarchy, okay? So it creates this hierarchy. So we have risk management plans, which drive enterprise security strategy, which drives enterprise security plans, which drive business unit plans, policies, procedures, and architectures. So there is a hierarchy. It's interesting to note here that this places risk management at the top. And why does it do that? Well, because one of the things that's critical to recognize within organizations is, of course, cybersecurity risk is not the only risk we're managing. Okay, we're managing a variety of risks to the organization. Organizations have financial risk, and in some cases, that's actively managed. Another area of risk that's managed is if you happen to be Walmart, loss management, which I already mentioned. Inventory control and loss management is an important aspect of risk management, just as important as cybersecurity management. And if you're any organization, safety is an interesting counterpart to security, because safety and security programmatically are the same. Why? Because the whole point of both activities is to manage risk, to minimize the likelihood of the loss. Okay? That's the whole reason for being. So that's why risk management sits at the top. That's not always immediately clear to people when we talk about governance. I think it's a very appropriate place for it, and so we'll leave it there. And having hit this spot, we're going to take a break. According to my clock, it's 7:35, so we'll come back at 7:45 and proceed. Because I am catching the bus after class, if anybody has anything they need to discuss with me, probably want to do it now. Well, it's intended to be 15 to 20 page paper, so it should, it's not unreasonable. Plus it's double spaced.
Oh, the outline could be double spaced?
Yeah. Absolutely. No, 12 point.
Okay.
But it should be double spaced.
I just always had a hard time understanding outlines. I always thought an outline was just supposed to be a rough sketch with a skeletal.
It is a framework. That's exactly what it should be. It's a framework.
Well, but that you want to be like 3 pages and maybe a little bit more.
Well, the outlines have levels. I'm just asking you to go into a little bit more depth than you have.
Okay. And that note, I was definitely been thinking about what we trying to start on it. I wonder if you, I don't know, maybe you're going to give us some examples or previous submitted things like that.
No. The outline is just to get you in the plan process. Okay? And it's not graded separately. Okay? You submit it. Lets me do a couple things. It lets me see. First of all, you pick the topic. You're working on the topic. One of the key things I'm doing is looking at your topic and going, oh, that topic is too broad. You need to narrow your topic. Or, oh, that topic is not really specific to cybersecurity management. It's a little too technical. And I might ask people to shift their topic. And it lets me then look at the outline to see that at least you thought it through to the point where you can structure something. What I say, 3 pages. Am I going to remain 3 pages? Am I going to flunk you if you don't give me 3 pages? No.
So it's not graded is what you're saying?
It's graded. It's 1 point assignment.
So it's graded whether you submit it or not?
Basically. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
The point is to measure your progress and to get you working on this. And one of the reasons that that's in place is because we have a lot of students in a course like this typically who are in their first semester in a graduate program in the U.S. and have never written a research paper. Never. And if they don't do an outline, they're going to be flailing. So.
Would you mind if I just showed you a quick rough sketch?
Sure.
I put my title as a study guide to eliminate, mitigating, terminating corporate espionage. What I thought I'd start out about is explain each person's position title and their role, and which would include CI, SRO, human resources, which would be their role in hiring people. This is just something I didn't know where to begin, so I just wrote everything down. Okay, and then So what I also went on to do is identifying potential attackers and then potential target.
Sounds to me like you eat later.
All right. Well, then I'm gonna probably see. I'm gonna try and get out then on rice. I can't guarantee, but I'm probably gonna try and see them so
On Monday.
on Monday,
Okay.
possibly.
Okay.
With something a little more typed out, hopefully down to more than a page.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Who's next?
Maybe he gives us.
No,
I just have a quick question. Like I see that there are forms for class participation, but then today is my first class. Like I enrolled on September 2nd.
okay.
So,
You're not going to lose points because you weren't on my list before today.
okay.
And you need to make sure though that you have watched the previous lectures. You already have. You caught up.
Oh no, I'm gonna watch them.
Okay. You need to watch the previous lectures.
Sure.
Okay. That's important. But yeah, no. So you should be fine. I I didn't take attendance today because I know that today's the first day. It should be stable, and I meant to run it off, and I didn't have time to run a new roster. So you should be on my new roster, and you won't lose anything by not being enrolled. Okay.
This is actually a supplemental time. Which we have to.
Yeah.
So with this class, that is for possible transition organization and track.
Possible. Sorry.
And the possible threats which any organization can have and their values. So here's how we can stop the threats to come to the organization and then go to the business.
Are you talking about traits that affect cybersecurity? Okay, but you have to very specifically address that.
I mean, I was wondering that the threats that people the problems which an organization can face like due to the cybersecurity.
Write it up and let me look. Write your outline and let me look at it. It sounds okay, but it's hard to judge. Okay.
Is it like that we have to cover all the policies of the cybersecurity and stuff for the people? Cybersecurity.
Well, it depends on your topic. You know how you're addressing
So
your
it's
topic.
not mandatory that it has
No,
to
it's expected to be relatively narrow. If you read the syllabus, what does the syllabus say? The narrower the better. Okay. Yeah. Take better initiatives is not very good. I would say should make greater effort in combating spear phishing emails. You know, something to that effect. Okay, just make greater effort in combating spear phishing emails. I'm trying to make sure the phrasing is clear and right.
But the idea is
Oh, the idea is good. Sure. The idea is right. Right. No, the idea is good. Cool.
I'll keep you updated.
Okay.
On your outline that you had with the structures that you want, right?
Yeah.
Now, I've been research papers before.
Yeah.
Do you want that AB, that structure, like the actual AB in your paper? Or
No, in the
You
outline. Just in the outline.
So that's not something you want to see on your paper, okay.
It's just for the outline.
And-
Yeah, as I was just explaining to us, the big reason I have the outline requirement is because every semester I have students in this course who have come from India, for example, and it's not uncommon for our students coming from India to have completed a bachelor's degree and never written a research paper. You know, so I'm just trying to do basics that, I'm sorry, a lot of us did in like fifth or sixth grade.
You want like APA kind of style, like
Yeah.
or stuff like that. 'Cause I noticed on those white papers, I think they're probably a different kind of a standard.
Yeah,
They
and it
also have
says,
the footnotes at
it
the
says on
bottom.
the white paper that it's not formatted.
Okay, I know, because
Because they're formatted like business white papers.
Right.
Right, right. You know,
I
it's
remember the first research paper I did, I didn't know anything about APA.
It's a
And
different
I would put like,
expectations.
the 1, 2, and I put it at the bottom of the page. That's how I did my citations. I had no idea.
Yeah.
I said, do AP. I'm like, what the heck is APA?
There you go.
Okay, so that's just for that. But everything else is going to be, it's going to look like we're going to paper.
Oh, yeah.
Your first paragraphs and regular stuff.
Oh,
Okay,
yeah.
I just want to make sure.
The outline is just, that format's just for the outline.
Just bring out, okay.
Because, and the reason I had to get so explicit is because, again, we have students who've never written an outline. They have no idea what an outline actually is supposed to be.
I was thinking you probably wouldn't want that kind of same structure, but I'm like, well, I better ask. Just to
Right,
be sure.
but it's, like I say, it's, again, it's, stuff that a lot of American students learn in 5th grade.
Yeah.
We have students come into the program who've never learned that, so,
Okay, thank you.
yeah. Okay, it's time to start again. So we're going to start by looking at some standards for governance of information security. And one of the things that I said is that one of the jobs of governance is to ensure that performance in cybersecurity is being measured against the standard. Well, we can actually even measure governance against a standard, and here is a standard, ISO 27014. Okay, this is part of the ISO 27000 series, which are cybersecurity standards. This is the standard for the governance of information security. It specifies 6 high-level, action-oriented information security governance principles. First, establish organization-wide information security. Second, adopt a risk-based approach. Third, set the direction of investment decisions. Fourth, ensure conformance with internal and external requirements. Fifth, foster a security-positive environment. And 6, review performance in relation to business outcomes. So they actually have their own model with a set of governance processes where we have the governing body that will direct strategy and policy, evaluate proposals, monitor performance, and communicate to stakeholders. And through all of this, providing assurance that information security is properly in place. Security convergence. Now, one of the things that's important to recognize in how we govern security within organizations, how we engage in security governance, is that we have seen the convergence of security-related governance in organizations since the broad deployment of information systems began in the 1970s and 1980s. In 2007, the Alliance for Enterprise Security Risk Management report identified a topic called enterprise risk management. The idea here is that we can have an approach that can gain superior alignment of security functions with the business mission while lowering costs. So there are some key concepts to making use of this concept of security convergence. Some of the key approaches are that to combine physical security and information security under one leader as a business function. To use separate business functions that report to a common senior executive, each with a separate budget, and autonomy, or to use a risk council approach to provide a collaborative approach to risk management that can include representatives from across the organization and will set policy about assuming risk to the organization. A 2015 study of cybersecurity management practices found that most larger organizations keep information security efforts and physical security efforts segregated even when there's significant collaboration in place. Full integration is actually much more common in smaller organizations, which is kind of fascinating. So we see this table, security convergence by organization size. It's most likely, the white part being fully integrated, most likely to be integrated in a very small organization. And as the organization size grows, it's less likely to be integrated until it squeaks back out just a little bit when we get to very large organizations. And the interesting thing here, too, is that organizations that are, this is some number of employees. If we have an organization that's 2,500 to 5,000 employees, basically, that's where we see the least likelihood that we've integrated any security functions within the organization. I'm just tossing that out as our final thought as we talk about governance, because I'm a big believer in security convergence. Having started I put on cybersecurity and physical security hats at the same time. Okay, I was the administrative officer for a squadron, and as such, I was also the physical security officer, or they just called it security officer, and I was also the information system security officer. And it was very clear to me that clearly they should be together. And having been also a professional, a safety professional, I see that, in fact, I really believe that it makes sense to manage risk altogether from one perspective. So not just converge physical and cybersecurity, but also under the same umbrella put safety, because they're all about managing risk. Okay, so let's move forward talking about our planning for cybersecurity implementation within an organization. The Chief Information Officer and the Chief Information Security Officer are going to play important roles in translating the overall strategic planning of the organization into tactical and operational cybersecurity plans. Now, the Chief Information Security Officer may report directly to the CIO or to some other C-level executive. I do see an issue in a corporation that, an organization that has a C structure, they call it C-level, where you have all the chief officers. If the Chief Information Security Officer doesn't report directly to someone who is a direct report to the CEO, I would view that as a lack of sufficient emphasis on the value of information security within the organization. And so where else then might they report? Chief Operating Officer, Chief Financial Officer, that's not uncommon, or a Chief Risk Officer. Again, if you have unified risk management within the organization, there should be someone who has the title of Chief Risk Officer. I'm going to beat this drum a lot because I'm sorry, I really am a firm believer in the Chief Risk Officer structure within a large organization, that needs to be a person reporting to the CEO who is going to be responsible for oversight of all organizational risk. The Chief Information Security Officer will play a more active role in the development of planning details than the CIO, but it's not possible to create a cybersecurity plan for an organization without involvement of the Chief Information Officer. And if someone's trying to do that, they're flailing, because, again, it's the whole concept of including security from the beginning of the systems development lifecycle. You got to include the CIO in this process, because it's going to impact everything that person and their subordinates do within the organization. Now, when the Chief Information Security Officer reports directly to the CIO, typically the CIO will charge the Chief Information Security Officer and other IT department heads to create and adopt plans that are consistent with and supportive of IT strategy. Because, of course, as we discussed, it supports the entire organizational strategy. But the Chief Information Security Officer, it falls on the Chief Information Security Officer to go beyond plans and efforts of the IT group to ensure that the cybersecurity plan directly supports the entire organization as well. So it has to support the strategies of other business units beyond the scope of the IT plan. And that's important. The Chief Information Security Officer has to bear that in mind. So let's look at a possible job description for a Chief Information Security Officer, because this is the key planner in this process. What's the first item? Create strategic information security plan with a vision for the future of information security at Company X. That's just our fictitious company here. Understands fundamental business activities performed by Company X. And based on this understanding, suggests appropriate information security solutions that uniquely protect these activities. This is one of my soapbox items here. Anybody who's my advisee, if you haven't heard this in my office when I'm advising you, you'll hear it eventually. And if you haven't heard it from me in class, you'll hear it eventually, and you'll probably hear it again before the end of the course. One of the things that's important to you as IT professionals is how you view yourself vis-a-vis your employer. And the example that I use, because it's a good example, and because I actually at one point had pretty interesting contact with their CIO, I use the example of, say, you're an undergraduate, you finish the program, you walk out the door, and you get hired to work in IT at Walgreens. Walgreens is now Walgreens Boots. If you didn't know that, they merged with a British company formerly called Boots the Chemist, which is the largest pharmacy company in Britain, and I think throughout Europe, actually, making Walgreens the single largest pharmacy chain in the world. They have a very large IT operation. But here's the point that I make to students that I'm going to try to make to you, because it applies to security as well here. If you get hired by Walgreens, you are no longer an IT person. Okay? And this is the mindset that you have to develop. You are a drugstore person who works in IT. Okay? The mission of the organization is your mission. And if you don't build the mindset to think of yourself, if you're working for Walgreens, if you don't think of yourself as a drugstore person instead of an IT person, you're not going to adequately add value to the organization. Same thing applies here, and that's why this is important. Why does the Chief Information Security have to understand the fundamental business activities? Because they can't do their job properly if they don't. Okay? So the whole point is, if you go to work for Walgreens, you're a drugstore professional who works in IT. That's the mindset you have to learn to take on board, whatever your job is. Okay? You go to work for J.P. Morgan Chase. You're now a banker who works in IT. Okay? And that's the mindset you have to approach your job with. That's when you learn to really add value to the company, because you think in terms of what the company is trying to do, not what IT is trying to do. There's a lot of IT people out there who engage in a lot of, I'm trying to think of an appropriate word. I have a really good description, but I can't use it in class because I'd probably get myself in trouble. But they engage in a lot of wasted activity because they want to do things that are cool IT things. Okay? But do they advance the mission of the organization? And in many cases, no, they don't. They're just cool. They're fun. They're neat to do, but they don't move things forward. Okay? And they make the IT people feel better, but that's not what it's about. Okay? The Chief Information Security Officer has to develop action plans, schedules, budgets, status reports, and other top management communications intended to improve the status of information security at Company X. So that's a real quick thumbnail description of a Chief Information Security Officer job. We're going to see a couple more of those, I think, as we go through the course. Now, once our plan, the overall plan for the organization, has been translated into IT and cybersecurity objectives and is filtered down to become tactical and operational plans, we can actually begin to implement cybersecurity within the organization. Cybersecurity implementation can be organized two different ways within an organization. And believe it or not, I have very simple questions about this on the final, and people miss it all the time, which is why I'm telling you that now. Okay? So you need to take this on board and recognize the difference. We can do a bottom-up plan, a bottom-up implementation, or we can do a top-down implementation. A top-down approach is initiated by top management. Management says, we are going to implement cybersecurity within the organization. A bottom-up approach, on the other hand, is initiated by administrators and technicians who look around and go, we need some security around here. And believe it or not, that's actually how security starts in some organizations. You get responsible sysadmins, network administrators, database administrators who go, we need to properly secure this stuff. It's not properly secured, particularly if you're in an instance where no one has run it from the top down. So when in the top-down approach, it's initiated by upper management. Upper management will issue policy, procedures, and processes. They will dictate the goals and expected outcomes of the project, and most importantly, determine who is going to be accountable for each required action within the plan as we implement cybersecurity in the organization. The pluses of the top-down approach is, of course, that it has strong upper management support. It has a dedicated champion. It has dedicated funding, it has clear planning, and it has a chance to influence organizational culture. For our top-down approach to succeed, high-level management has to buy into the effort and provide full support to all the departments that are involved. It will not succeed without full buy-in by senior management. That's why the governance piece, that's why we spend a lot of time talking about governance. How long is it till you're going to be involved in cybersecurity governance? Probably a long time for most of you. Maybe not so for some of you, though. You might find yourself in a role where you have some influence on this and ensuring that proper governance structures are in place. In a top-down approach, we have to have a champion. This is an executive with sufficient influence to move the project forward. There has to be somebody who has influence within the organization. In the top-down approach, involvement and support of end users is still critical. Now, obviously, the bottom-up approach, clearly we've involved some people at the bottom of the hierarchy as far as jump-starting things, but they still matter in the top-down approach. Key end users, actually, when you're planning in a top-down approach, it's not uncommon to assign end users to design teams, sometimes known as joint application design teams. And these joint application design teams have to be able to survive employee turnover. So we recognize that we're drawing people from across the organization to create these teams. Some key steps to ensure that our joint application design team approach will succeed is to identify project objectives and limitations, identify critical success factors, define our project deliverables, organize workshop activities and exercises. Define a schedule of workshop activities, select participants, prepare workshop material, organize workshop activities and exercises, prepare, inform, and educate workshop participants, and coordinate workshop logistics. This is most commonly found in one particular methodology that we're going to discuss later on for security implementation called the octave method. But it's not uncommon to engage in a set of steps like this in any case. The top-down approach, and this is very common, may involve a formal development strategy referred to as a systems development lifecycle. This is proven over the years to be the most successful top-down approach. It is a requirement of the federal government. So if you are implementing security in a government organization, you are required to use the systems development lifecycle. Why? Because they're required to use the systems development lifecycle to develop systems, period. Okay? You may be required, if you're a government contractor, to use this methodology as well. SDLC is a method for design and implementing an information system. And one of the things that we find is that SDLC-based projects may be initiated by events, or they may be planned. They're always better when they're planned, okay? So as we look at the concept of systems development lifecycle, which I know is discussed in our project management class. I know it's discussed because I talked to the person who's teaching that and said, we need to discuss this. So I know she does. Information, when we look at the concept of the systems development lifecycle, information security has to be managed in a manner similar to any other major system that we're implementing within the organization. Information security is a major system. It is a major system that overlies other systems. So it's distinctive in that aspect. It's not a single system that does one thing. It's a system that overlies other systems to make them more effective and safer. The systems development lifecycle is valuable because we have discovered over the years that using a methodology such as SDLC will ensure that a rigorous process is in place, and it will help us avoid missing steps. The goal of this is to create a comprehensive security posture and program. So, at the end of each phase of the systems development lifecycle comes a structured review. This will determine if the project should be continued, discontinued, outsourced, or postponed. Now, if you're using SDLC to implement cybersecurity within an organization, I always sort of chuckle at this because, of course, you can't discontinue, outsource, or you could outsource some aspects of it, but you can't discontinue and you really can't postpone. You got to do it. Okay, so this feasibility study that takes place at the end of each step of the systems development lifecycle has considerably less meaning when you're dealing with implementation of cybersecurity because you have to implement it. Period. You can't just go, oh, we did a assessment of feasibility and we just decided, yeah, it's not feasible. It's the wrong answer. Okay, it's an unacceptable answer. So let's examine the security systems development lifecycle. The security systems development lifecycle may differ in several specifics from the systems development lifecycle, but the overall methodology is going to be very similar to the SDLC, which you may already be familiar with. The security systems development lifecycle involves identification of the specific threats and the risks that they represent, as well as the subsequent design and implementation of a set of specific controls to counter those threats and manage the risk. Okay, that's what we're ultimately attempting to accomplish in this process. So we have an investigation phase. This is the overall SDLC waterfall methodology. We have an investigation phase where we look at process, outcomes, goals, scope, costs and benefits, budget and constraints, and development team specifications. Then we go into analysis where we look at issues with the current program or system, its environment, and determine requirements of the new system. logical design, we do general programmer system specifications, what we call sometimes a blueprint. Physical design, we do detailed program and system specifications. Solutions, which includes resources and personnel. In implementation, we look at feedback, testing, programmer system acceptance, and once we're through implementation, we go into the final phase called maintenance and change. In maintenance and change, we have to engage in performance measurement to see, are the systems performing to the level that we expect them to perform, and operational reporting. When we find that the existing programmer system is ineffective or inefficient, we can start an entirely new program, and at any step we can loop back to the previous step when we find that the previous step wasn't adequate to the purpose of proceeding to the next. So the same phases that are used in the traditional systems development lifecycle are used to support specialized implementation of a security project. The fundamental process is the identification of specific threats and the creation of specific controls to counter those threats. The security systems development lifecycle unifies the processes and makes it a coherent program rather than a series of random seemingly unconnected actions, which many of you have probably worked for managers where you wonder, is that their whole life? Are they just entirely a series of random, unconnected actions? Or is there some prime focus and goals that we're trying to reach? So in the investigation phase, this often begins as a directive from management that will specify the process, the outcomes and goals, and the constraints of the project. Very often, this will include budget. It will begin with an affirmation or creation of security policies. Why? Because security policies are what drive everything that comes after them. Okay? Security policies are the strategic and operational plans. Strategic and tactical plans in the security planning horizon. In investigation, we will organize teams to analyze problems and define the scope of the project, including the objectives and constraints that may not be covered in program policy. So we have to examine those as well. Typically, a feasibility analysis will determine whether the organization has the resources and commitment to conduct a successful security analysis and design. The only option, if the organizational feasibility analysis says this is not feasible, is to report back to senior management and ask for more resources. Okay, because it's otherwise there is no. The only acceptable reason for it not to be feasible to proceed at this point is insufficient resources. Okay, because the question of are we going to implement security within the organization or not is, again, not an open question. The answer is yes. There is no option of a no answer. Analysis. In the analysis phase, we study all the documents from the investigation phase. The development team will conduct a preliminary analysis of existing security policies or programs, along with an in-depth look at documented current threats and any associated controls that are already in place. This includes an analysis of relevant legal issues that could impact the design of the security solution. So it's important to understand our legal environment. We talk about the criticality of understanding our legal environment as we move through it, but here we see it's even more important because we can't properly plan to move forward without a good grasp of that. This phase also includes the risk management task, that is, identifying, assessing, and evaluating levels of risk, or we begin the risk management task because it moves through the entire process. But it begins in this stage, identifying, assessing, evaluating our risk levels. In the logical design phase, we create and develop a blueprint for security, and we examine and implement key policies within the organization. Now, we have to do this before we can move to the physical design phase, because in the physical design phase, we actually evaluate the technology that we need to put in place to support our security blueprint. We can also generate alternative solutions, and we have to agree on a final design for security. This does include the design of technical controls and the implementation of those controls. Okay, because technical controls are an important aspect of cybersecurity, important enough that we essentially devote an entire course to them. Okay, so you have to have technical controls in place. We don't get those in place until we've designed them and moved forward to implement them. Okay. The logical and physical design will continue with the formulation of all of the controls and safeguards that are necessary to protect the information in the organization from attack by threats. So we're going to look at controls, the entire gamut of controls, which includes managerial controls. They used to break it down very clearly in NIST into managerial controls, operational controls, and technical controls. They've really de-emphasized those terms, although they're still there in the NIST publications. But in this instance, it's a very convenient way to break them down. So we have these three categories. Managerial controls. Managerial controls cover security processes that are designed by strategic planners and executed by the security administration of the organization. Okay? So these are controls that are fundamentally managerial in nature. Then we have operational controls. In operational controls, we see that management functions and lower level planning, like disaster recovery and incident response planning, are put in place, as well as, at this point, we will address personnel security, physical security, and protection of production inputs and outputs. Okay, so those are operational controls. Those are not necessarily technical controls, and that's important to recognize. There is a delineation between operational controls. They're not managerial in nature. They may still be most specifically governed by policy, but they're not technical implementations. Technical controls address technical approaches that are used to implement security within the organization. Technical controls have a high level of complexity. Why? Because they have to be selected, they have to be acquired, which means they have to either be made or bought, and they have to be integrated into the physical IT structure of the organization. And that's a challenge. The NIST publications, as I mentioned, used to have very strong emphasis on managerial, operational, and technical controls, but now they're sort of only mentioned in passing. So I mentioned them here, and when I teach this course a year from now, they may not even be here. It may be evident that this particular breakdown of controls into categories no longer carries any validity. So, in the implementation phase, we're going to see it's very simple, very similar to implementing anything in a systems development lifecycle. We're going to acquire security solutions. We're going to make or buy them. We're going to test. We're going to implement, and we're going to test again. Now, when we make security solutions, some of those are policy solutions. Okay? We can make policy solutions. We can buy policy solutions. There are any number of vendors that will sell you a set of canned policy documents for your organization. I have some of them. If you look in the InfoSec toolbox that there's a link to from Blackboard, I have all kinds of, purchased policy policy documents. And there's some validity to that. You can also use publicly accessible documents like the NIST standards. They're not necessarily structured optimally for that particular use, but they certainly can be adapted. And then we have physical implementations, obviously, because we do have technical controls that are going to be put in place. We also, at this point, will evaluate personnel issues, and we're going to conduct specific training and education programs. Training and education is an important aspect of the implementation phase, right? Because if we're changing anything that's going to impact IT professionals within the organization, they have to be trained. If we're going to impact end users, they have to be trained. And people may have to have a level of training and awareness above that, where we're actually going to have to edge into education. We're going to have to educate some people as well. Finally, the entire package is presented to upper management for final approval. There's a variety of methodologies for doing this. We are going to look at how the federal government does this, because I have to teach that since we're a center of academic excellence in cyber defense. But that's, some organizations, this approval by upper management is a pretty informal process where the CISO will go to whoever they're reporting to and say, okay, we have everything implemented, and we believe that we're now in the maintenance phase of cybersecurity, and we will continue to monitor and assess as we move forward. And, I would expect there is some kind of formal report, but it may go no further formally than the immediate superior. Or there may be a formal process where there actually is an approval that has to be granted and say, okay, good, you can make this work. Perhaps the most important element of the implementation phase is management of the project plan, because we have to plan the project, we have to supervise task and action steps within the project, and we have to wrap up the project. So we use project management methodologies, obviously, for the entire systems development lifecycle, but they become more critical at certain phases. Implementation is a big part of that has to be run through a formal project management methodology. Our cybersecurity project team that is going to engage in this should consist of individuals who are experienced in one or more technical and non-technical areas. So we'll have people on the team in technical areas, we'll have people in non-technical areas. We should have the champion. Who is the champion? It is a senior executive in the organization with sufficient influence to ensure that this whole project is going to run through to completion. It should be somebody at a minimum, if you're a normal American corporate structure, a direct report to the CEO. It can be any of the people who report to the CEO who is championing this, but it should be somebody that has that level of influence within the organization, because it has to be someone who can ensure that it will run through to completion successfully. We have a team leader. Okay, this is somebody who is in charge. Most commonly in an organization who is engaging in this process, it would be the Chief Information Security Officer, would be the team leader. You have security policy developers. Only in a very large organization you're going to have people whose sole commitment is writing security policy, but you may have that. Risk assessment specialists, security professionals, systems administrators, and end users. And when I say system administrators, I don't just mean sysadmins. It's also network admins. It's database admins. Okay? It's anybody who's responsible for administering the information resources within the organization. And end users. They need to be involved in this. When we look at staffing a cybersecurity function within an organization, each organization has to examine the options for staffing of the information security function within the organization. First, it's important to decide how to position and name the security function. And we've already talked about the fact, and this can be confusing, and I admit it, that in information security, the person who is in charge sometimes is the Chief Information Security Officer, and sometimes they're the Chief Security Officer. And the titles get used relatively interchangeably, to the point where CIO Magazine, it's a very good publication, has another sister publication they just call CSO Magazine, standing for Chief Security Officer. Are they addressing physical security in CSO Magazine? No, it's all about cybersecurity, okay? And but that's why it's important to figure out how you're going to position and name this security function. Again, I'll beat my drum. It has to be at as high a level as is organizationally feasible. At high a level as is organizationally feasible. Second, we have to plan for the proper staffing of the cybersecurity function. So we have to ensure that we have sufficient staff in place to carry through with implementation of proper cybersecurity within the organization. Third, we have to understand the impact of cybersecurity across every role in IT. And it's important to recognize that there is not a person who works in information technology who does not have at least some smidgen of cybersecurity responsibility. Okay. And they may have more than a smidgen, and it's not unusual in organizations to have personnel that have shared cybersecurity and IT responsibilities. Finally, we have to integrate solid cybersecurity concepts into the personnel management practices of the organization. So, and we'll talk more about this later, but it is important to ensure that cybersecurity concepts are in personnel management. As we look at our cybersecurity professional staffing, we discovered it takes a wide range of professionals to support a diverse information security program. We have a chief information officer who, regardless of where the CSO, CISO is positioned within the organization, is still an important and critical player in cybersecurity. We have the chief security officer, or the chief information security officer, and we may have both, okay? If we have an integrated security organization, we may have a chief security officer who is responsible for both physical and cybersecurity, and to whom the chief information security officer reports. That's the one place where I would say it's fully acceptable to have the CISO down at the third tier. Okay, because they're still reporting to somebody who has a primary responsibility of security. We have security managers, we have security technicians, we probably have security analysts. Okay, what's a security analyst do? I don't know. Now, I'm saying that, I'm kind of throwing my hands up because the cybersecurity analyst title is very commonly used, but in reality, most of the time they're either a security technician or a security manager. Every once in a while you get people that are genuinely just analysts, and I applaud that when that's the case, because that's what the term should be used for. We also have data owners. Data owners have a vital stake in cybersecurity because it's their data that's being protected. Okay? We have data custodians. That's the people that are responsible for taking care of the data for the data owners. If you're a data owner within the organization, you have databases that support your operations. Do you run the databases yourself? No, somebody in IT does. Those are the data custodians. And we have data users, and those are the people in the organization that are actually making use of the data. Okay? So that's all part of implementation. That's why you may go, he went off on a tangent. He talked about staffing. No, staffing is a critical piece of the implementation puzzle. Okay, and that's why it's included here. Once we're done with implementation, we actually move forward into the maintenance and change phase. Although last, it is perhaps the most important, given the high level of ingenuity and the threats that we encounter today. The repair and restoration of information is a constant duel with an adversary that most of the time you'll never see. Okay? You don't know who these people are. You don't know where they're from. You don't know what they're doing. I mean, ideally you would find that out, but the fact is that people operate in ways that make it pretty well impossible to determine that. As new threats emerge and old threats evolve, the information security profile of an organization requires constant adaptation. So that's why it's not just the maintenance phase, it's maintenance and change. We have to change. Why? Our threats change. Why? Our IT environment changes. Why? Because IT's job is to engage in a process of continuous improvement. They want to continuously improve the IT stance of the organization. They want to continuously improve their ability to facilitate the operation of the organization. And when they do that, it changes our cybersecurity environment as well. Once the information security program is implemented, it has to be operated, it has to be properly managed, and it has to be kept up to date by means of a set of established procedures. If we discover that the organization is not, that the program is not adjusting adequately to changes in the internal or external environment, we may actually have to begin the entire cycle all over again. Okay, and that's not real common. It might result from, for example, we have an audit, and the audit identifies systemic issues, okay, to the point where we realize that, we should just start this again from the top down, okay, and move through the whole systems development life cycle so that we resolve systemic issues in a way that deals with things as a coherent and comprehensive system. We always want to try to do that. Now, while a systems management model is designed to manage or operate systems, the maintenance model is intended to focus efforts on systems maintenance. So there are pieces of this model that are very important. Pieces of the model include external monitoring, internal monitoring, planning and risk assessment, vulnerability assessment and remediation, and readiness and review. So these are all parts of the maintenance model. If we look at the maintenance model, we see that we have vulnerability assessment and remediation, and we see a variety of types of assessments: internet, intranet, platform, security validation, wireless vulnerability assessment, modem vulnerability assessment. These are done on an ongoing basis. So it's important to recognize the fact that assessment is important, but assessment is not an audit. Okay? Audits typically are external. Assessment is what you do internally. Readiness, we see a planning and risk assessment, where we're continuously looking at readiness and review. Internal monitoring, which is a part of assessment. We have IT change control. We have architectural review boards, footprinting, fingerprinting, intrusion detection systems, external monitoring. We wait to hear from people outside the organization, public internet sources, vendors, cert organizations that someone from the outside may possibly inform us that we have issues. Okay, that's what you don't want to hear, but one of the issues that we have to plan in the security systems development life cycle is the systems management model. One of the models that some people like to use is the ISO management model, which contains 5 areas, which includes fault management, configuration and name management, accounting management, performance management, and security management. I'm not going to go into depth as to what all of these are, more than a line or two. But it is important to recognize that there are a lot of different methods of approaching a systems management model. There's a whole ISO publication, 27001 actually, which is the management model for managing security. Okay? Fault management involves identifying and addressing faults in the applied information security profile, and then addressing them, and the monitoring and resolution of user complaints. Configuration and change management involves the administration of various components involved in the security program and the administration of changes in the strategy, operation, or composition of the information security program. Change management extends beyond just change with the changes within the security program, though. Change management in the IT realm is an important piece of cybersecurity. Why? Because no changes to systems are made without documentation when you have change management in place. So from a security perspective, if something is different, remember the goal of security is to keep things the same. If something is different, you check to see if that change is documented. If it's documented, guess what? It's fine. Oh, based on the fact that it's changed, though, do we need to reassess our security posture on this particular item that's been changed? So change management is not thought of necessarily as a security tool, but it clearly is, and it's an important security tool. So it's not just security program change management, it's IT change management as well. Accounting and auditing management involves chargeback accounting and systems monitoring. Accounting management involves monitoring the use of particular components of a system, and with accounting management, you begin to determine optimal points of system use as indicators for upgrade and improvement. Auditing is the process of reviewing the use of a system, not to determine its performance, but to determine if misuse or malfeasance has occurred. That's what we would call internal audit. Okay? So when you hear companies talk about internal audit, that's normally what they're looking for. Misuse or malfeasance. Okay? And that's when we say accounting and auditing management, it's really accounting and internal auditing. It's not cost accounting, though. It's accounting for performance. Performance management. It is important to monitor the performance of security systems and their underlying IT infrastructure to determine if they're effectively and efficiently doing the job for which they were implemented. Some information security control systems, like internet usage monitors that look for inappropriate use of internet resources, will operate just as pass-by devices. Some may be a little more actively involved in protection. But the point is to ensure that every system that's in place is effectively doing the job for which it is designed. Now, once an information security management program is functional, once an information security program is functional, it has to be operated and managed. And in order to assist in the actual management of information security programs, we can make use of a formal management standard. Okay? And to assist, a formal management standard. This can provide us some insight into the processes and procedures that are necessary, and they can be either based on the ISO 27002 model or the NIST models. Now, the ISO 27002 model is a model for implementation of information security. It has an accompanying model, ISO 27001. I know. Why is the management model numbered before the main model? I don't know. Okay? I can't tell you why they did that. But ISO 27001 specifies the requirements to establish, implement, operate, monitor, review, maintain, and improve a documented information security management system. Okay? So it's a standard for a security management system. What does that mean? Well, it's designed to ensure selection of adequate and proportionate security controls that protect information assets and give confidence to interested party. Both the ISO 27001 and 002 processes use a registration certification process that is very similar to ISO 9000. Anybody in here ever been involved in ISO 9000 certification? Nobody. Okay. ISO 9000 is a quality control certification, very common in American businesses. It's very common to see that you'll see printed on the side of trucks, an ISO 9000 certified company. Because what are they certified? It's certified that they have a quality control process in place. It is important to recognize that ISO certification is not certification of your security. It is certification of the process that's in place to ensure that you're secure. I know it sounds like a niggly distinction, but it really is a distinction. All that's been certified is that you have a process in place that should ensure that you are secure. Okay? Typically, the way that the ISO certifications are carried out, you can pretty well count on the fact that someone who is ISO certified, particularly if they're ISO certified in 27002 and 001, is secure. But as we already mentioned, ISO charges hefty fees for copies of the ISO standards, and that is an issue for this. The NIST model, of course, was based on publications created by the National Institute for Standards and Technology to provide security for U.S. government computer systems. The Special Publication 800 series, like Special Publication 800-14, generally accepted principles and practices for securing information technology systems, are the core of the series. There's a whole large number of publications in this series, all of varying applicability to any particular circumstance. Some are going to be very applicable, some are going to be marginally applicable. But the best thing about using NIST standards is that they are in the public domain, so they can be freely adapted and rewritten to meet any particular need. Why are they in the public domain? Because there is a federal law that something that is produced by a federal employee as regular performance of their duties cannot be copyrighted. It is automatically placed into the public domain. To my knowledge, the U.S. government is the only organization in the world that automatically puts all of its output into the public domain. The fascinating thing to me about that is, you look at things that people protect pretty viciously sometimes when it comes to intellectual property, like photographs. Every photograph taken by an official government photographer is in the public domain. So, there are one of the things that I learned in my time in the Navy is there are official photographers, and they take thousands and thousands of photos, most of which get published online, and they're all in the public domain. So, kind of cool. So I have lots of pictures of me flying that I can do anything I want to with because they were taken by official Navy photographers. But it's a huge advantage if we want to make use of NIST standards as a foundation for creating a security management model for our organization, because we can take them and do anything we want to with them. There is a new NIST model, okay, that is significant. It is called the Framework for Improving Critical Infrastructure Cybersecurity, and it is the draft version is 1.1, which is actually quite a significant change from the initial version 1. It's commonly called the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. Version 1 was published in 2014. The draft version 1.1 framework is going to be published any day now. However, it is the required tool for federal agencies by the Presidential Executive Order on Strengthening the Cybersecurity of Federal Networks and Critical Infrastructure, which is dated May 11, 2017. Implementation that's specific to the federal government is dictated by a draft publication, which is a NIST Interagency Report, NISTR. That's what a NISTR is. NIST Interagency Report 8170, which is called the Cybersecurity Framework Implementation Guidance for Federal Agencies. But one of the key pieces to recall when we look at the NIST cybersecurity framework is that this model was written for and is intended for use by everyone. Okay, it doesn't matter who you are. It is a model that is not specific to the federal government. That's why the government has the Cybersecurity Framework Implementation Guideline for federal agencies. Because the model as it exists, the framework, is intended to be a framework for everyone. Everyone. The NIST model in the NIST cybersecurity framework breaks the functions and categories of cybersecurity activities into 5 areas. And this is some significant things to remember about this particular model. Areas are identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover, which actually make very good sense, okay? And they break out into this very nice chart. There's even color coding associated with each of these. Identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. And each one of those is broken, each one of those, which are called functions. It has a 2-letter function ID. It's called a function. Each function is broken into category identification and a category name. So for example, let's look at detection, because it's the smallest one. We have DE.AE, which is the category anomalies and events. So that makes sense. DE is detect, AE is anomalies and events. We have DE.CM, security continuous monitoring. And then we have DE.DP, detection processes. Okay? So this is how we have broken down security program into this set of functions, and then from functions further break it down into a set of categories. When we look at the NIST cybersecurity framework, ISACA has a good document for implementation that addresses use of the NIST cybersecurity framework in governance, and that's useful. ISACA is the home of the Information Technology Governance Institute. Okay, so they look a lot at IT governance and, by extension, cybersecurity governance, and they have an excellent document. As we move through the course, we are going to see much, much more on the NIST framework, and eventually the course will be entirely rewritten to focus principally on the NIST framework. Probably I'm not going to do that until Whitman and Matter down there at Kennesaw State University come out with the next version of their textbook, because it makes my job a lot easier when they do that. I imagine that this summer, I've not met either of those gentlemen, but I imagine this summer has had them very busy, because they like me realize that, well, crap, we have to rewrite this whole damn book. Because there is no choice, okay? They have to move with the way things change. And so that's where we're going to leave our planning discussion for tonight, which does bring us to the end. And I am done a little bit early. So I actually have some time to field some questions before I have to go off and catch the bus. Are there any questions that people might have? Okay. If I don't have any collective questions and you didn't get a chance to talk to me during the break, I have about 10 minutes. I can stick around and talk to people individually. So thank you for your attention, and we will see you next week. Have a nice weekend.